name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where we highlight individuals who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly, and Kaye Bealer, you are definitely one of those persons.
I grew up in Dallas. I always loved reading. I always had a passion for learning. I think about first, second grade, I started getting interested into sports a little bit, like track and dance. And so being active and staying busy definitely started early. And so I think that was my first love of being committed to something. When you think about water finance or infrastructure finance, it is specialized within the space of infrastructure, water infrastructure, and finance. So for me, civil engineers always drove the industry, but I found this nice niche where you were a complement to it. What can we afford to do, and what do we have the ability to finance? And so that is where I just really gained a love for not only finance infrastructure, but also serving, that customer relations, that client relations that I really focus on now. And so you have to make a shift between selling and serving, right? Because a lot of people think it's sales, and it's really solutions. It's really, how can I help you sleep at night, right? I'm a single mom. You have people who have thoughts about that. Hey, I can do what I can do. I just work on values and making sure that he is equipped to make the best decisions and has the best opportunities that he can. When you sow good seeds and you have that positivity, you attract positive people. Don't doubt yourself and keep sowing good seeds. Treat people right because it's the right thing to do.
Kaye, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. The name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where we highlight individuals who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly, and Kaye Bealer, you are definitely one of those persons. For the years of experience that you have had in strategic management, the years of experience in water, starting your own consulting firm, and still finding time to be a strong mom and also being an excellent athlete, we got to get to know you a little better. So let's start from the jump or the beginning.
Okay.
What was your passion in, let's say, primary school? What got you to this point? And then just let's walk through the process of becoming Kaye.
Well, I was always outgoing. I grew up in Dallas. And so my parents, my dad being an engineer, my mom a nurse, I was kind of a little different, dance to the beat of my own drum, but I always loved reading. I always had a passion for learning. So I think academics definitely came out early. And then as I think about first, second grade, I started getting interested into sports a little bit, like track and dance. And so being active and staying busy definitely started early. And so I think that was my first love of being committed to something. Like I really wanted to make good grades and have perfect attendance. The funny thing.
Got it. And then track, like what event did you run in track and what experiences you learned from it?
Well, I ran the 800, right?
Okay.
And it was
That's a
one
tough
day,
race.
yeah, like now it's considered a sprint, but back in the day it was middle distance, but I think it was definitely a test of endurance. It's a mental toughness, it's a strategy race. And as I think about it now, I think one of the most important things I learned was how to pace myself, right? Because you could just go out there and go too fast. And so knowing when to push and knowing when to pull. But I think sports really gave me an understanding early of everything isn't under your control, right? You can practice and then you have all of these other things, weather, nerves, things like that. But the rigor and the resilience that required for track, it just really, I think, prepared me most for the business environment.
Yeah, that's a tough sport because it requires that grit. I mean, I used to practice the 400. I was never a
Right.
good 400-meter runner at anything. I'm a more tennis person than soccer, but
Hmm.
you come around that last bend and the 400 is half of your race and
Hmm.
it pulls on everything. You want to quit, maybe
Right.
just slow down a bit, but you really want to push the pace that, and then just to double that, I can't even
Right.
imagine. Can't even imagine. So then what led you to want to pursue a degree in finance and economics?
When I was younger, I remember going to, like, I guess it was the office supply store with my parents or something, and I was always paying with calculators and cash registers. So I always had a love for numbers. I was really interested in money and how money worked.
Mm,
And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do at first, I was like, oh, maybe I'll pursue medical. And then, anatomy and physiology wasn't my thing.
right.
But I just understood economics and I understood that everything, finance is a part of everything. So I wanted to be in the midst of that. And so as I started learning more, it just gave me, I think it prepared me for a way to think. And
Mm.
so I was able to apply that to other things. And so it just went from there. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I felt like it'd give me a good foundation for sure.
Yeah, got you. It's like you're working on your ikigai. You know you so there's this concept I bring up on the podcast called
Hmm.
ikigai. And
Hmm.
so ikigai is considered your life's purpose or your life's goal. It's a Japanese philosophy and it's
Hmm.
four intersecting circles. So it's what you're good at, what
Hmm.
you love doing, what the world needs, and what people will pay you for. Right. And so
Wow.
all
Okay.
four of those things have to cross and intersect for it to be ikigai. So a lot of times people are in a role, right? They're good at
Hmm.
it. The world needs it and they pay them, but because there isn't a passion for the role from the jump, they run into an issue where they don't love what they're doing and they're getting paid and they're good at it, right? So there's a
Right.
disassociation and you can feel it in your spirit that it's not aligned with you, right?
Right.
And when someone finds true alignment, the work doesn't feel like work. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel stressful because you enjoy the process, you enjoy what you do. And
For
so
sure.
that's what it sounds like. You knew you were good at using, being a studious person, being accountable. Accounting is like being accountable.
Right.
You knew you were good at math, so you're like, all right, let me navigate my way to the role of finance. While you were at college in doing finance, what did you
Hmm.
find was like a difficult class that you had to like overcome? What you found
Oh,
hard in
wow.
the process?
It had to be econometrics, right? Because econometrics and mathematical economics, it was just so foreign to me. And it
Mm,
was the first time I really had to apply myself. School came naturally, but it was one of the times where I had to look at my professor's office hours. And it was also the first time I was thrust into being in a very diverse environment
mm-hmm,
and being in an environment where some people didn't have necessarily the expectations. So I remember going to one of my professors, and he's thinking like, wow, I never had a woman or a young girl that wanted to study economics, and what made you do that? And it just never occurred to me not to do it. So I think that made me more determined. But econometrics and mathematical economics definitely were like hard classes, but once you could get past that, you knew you were on the other side of it. So
yeah, it's funny because I come from a civil engineering background and they're like certain classes you take that
hmm.
once you get past them, you can finish out the degree. That's structural analysis. Like if anyone who's done NYU's Polytechnic engineering, civil engineering course, the first thing they ask you, did you get past structural analysis? If you get past structural, that's like the gatekeeper right there.
Right,
If you can
right,
get past that class, you're all right. You just need to keep the course because it's going to test you.
right,
And yeah, many times you have to go to office hours and talk to the professor and like get that extra lessons because it just is so foreign to you. And some of the students that you're in the class with, for instance, one of my close friends, his dad was an engineer and his
hmm,
granddad is an engineer. So there's just innate knowledge just by being around this your whole life that no, you're getting thrust into this myself. And within 6 months, you have to take an exam about this. That is no, you just have to give yourself that grace and like
right,
be all right. It's like, okay, he doesn't have to go to the office hours, but he has 15 years ahead of this where he had experience around this topic. This is the
right,
first time seeing it. So be okay, be graceful to yourself, and go to the professor, talk to the
right.
professor, ask
Oh,
him
for sure.
questions. No, that was good because a lot of times people feel so ashamed about like, why is this person getting it? We're in the same class, we're doing the same coursework, right? But why is this person just getting it and I'm not?
Right.
So no, that's good. And so from there, you recognize how did you work yourself into a passion for water? So that's a very interesting dynamic you got going on there.
Well, it wasn't. I don't think I had a plan at first, and then
Hmm.
once I was upon graduation,
Yeah.
I talked to different firms, and a consulting firm talked to me, and they thought, "Have you ever?" And they asked me, "Had I ever thought about infrastructure?" And so that's kind of where civil and finance met. And I remember growing up, my dad was from rural Arkansas.
Hmm.
And so he talked about not having running water when he was really young. And so as I went through the interview process, it was the nexus of finance, of economics, of infrastructure, and the first part talking about just water quality and equity. And so it just amazed me that, being in Texas, everybody talked about oil and they talked about energy, but there wasn't a lot of conversation about water. And so I was
Mm.
just like, oh, why not? And so as I got into it, it really stressed the importance, and I really gained an understanding of how important water and water infrastructure was, and
Yeah.
how important it is across the world.
First, it's like now considered since 2020 a commodity, right? And so
Right,
commodities are rare, especially drinkable water.
right,
And we've seen what has happened in Flint, Michigan. And if you look at even how, if you look at how buildings, not even buildings, how cities, major cities are always beside a large body of water. So
right,
like wherever you can find rivers or wherever you find a large body of water, Sydney, New York, right?
right,
We could talk about Barcelona, anywhere in the world, large bodies of water is really close to big cities. So, yeah,
right.
we recognize the importance of it, and now it's like becoming even more of a major topic because of not only natural disasters and droughts, but now having drinkable water is a big deal. So having yourself in the forefront of it is amazing. But I want to ask you though, so
Hmm.
you figured out your water passion. Did that come
Hmm.
before or after you started your consulting firm?
Water started before, so water was definitely one of the finance of water. So I think one
Gotcha.
of the things about when you think about water finance or infrastructure finance, there are probably more neurosurgeons than really that specialize within the space of
Got it.
infrastructure, water infrastructure, and finance. And so as I was coming into it, that was when Gatsby 34, when we first started thinking about asset management, when we first started thinking about useful life. So there was definitely a conversation that was brewing about long term and talking about the value of water.
Mhm.
So for me, civil engineers always drove the industry, but I found this nice niche where you were a complement to it, right? Because you could think of all of the projects, all of the things, all of the improvements that you wanted, but you couldn't figure out how to pay for it. So it was,
Right.
how do we figure out how to pay for it, and that knee of the curve analysis. And so it put you in the room, as far as executives. I had friends who were engineers, but they weren't meeting with CFOs, they weren't
Right.
meeting with CEOs. And so I just became, I think, very good at listening, but also understanding how it was the lifeblood of infrastructure even before design, right?
Mhm.
It was, as a concept, what can we afford to do, and what do we have the ability to finance? And so that is where I just really gained a love for not only finance infrastructure, but also serving, that customer relations, that client relations that I really focus on now.
Yeah, no, and it's like in the concept of dream plan execute is you starting at the dream process
Right.
and it's a vision, but the vision has to get complemented by how much we can pay for it, right? And
Right.
how we're going to fund it. And so like a real estate developer, the first thing they're going to do is go out and source funding.
Mhm.
And they're going to hire an architect and engineer. They come way later. They put the plans together, and then the execution team is construction. At that point, the funding is already procured. You
Right.
know what how much you're going to expect to pay. So yeah, it makes sense. You would be in the room with the decision makers, the person who's sourcing the funding. But it's interesting because it's like most people don't know about water financing. So let's
Hmm.
kind of dig into that. Like, what
Okay.
what does that look like if someone's in a room, a fly on the wall in a room talking about water financing? What does that look like?
Well, it first starts with revenue requirements. You know, you're thinking about how much revenue, when you think about your rates, when you open up your water bill,
Right.
that is where you're looking at the cost of service to provide water, either drinking water or the cost of service to treat the water. And so as you look at it, it's how do we fund this? How do we fund operations? How do we fund improvements? And so I would say your water bill is the first thing. Most people in the summer, they are like, oh, wow, you know, they turn on their sprinklers and they think about that. Or in
Yeah.
Texas, where I'm from, you thought about drought restrictions. So it was really, you know, doing more with less was the conversation. And how do we plan? Because people think that that is taxpayer funded, but really it's ratepayer funded. There are no taxes. It's an
Mm.
enterprise asset. So you really have to recover the cost of service. So that really gets down to analyzing how much does this cost us, right? And how much is it going to cost us in the future? And not just the operations. You have the labor, right? You have all of the consultants like you and I are. How
Yeah.
do we pay that? And so that was the part where it all comes together, and it's really being a solution provider from a financial standpoint.
Got it, got it. And so your first roll out of school was what's the name of the company? Was
Carter and Burgess. And so
Cardinburg.
it was a small, well, I would say small, about 3,400 people for, you know,
Yeah.
my current company that's what, almost 60,000
Yeah, it's
AECOM.
massive. Yeah.
Right. It was 3,500, but it was a Texas firm. And it was a new practice because we had some partners who had come over from KPMG. So it was really very cutting edge at the time because you had rate studies, you know, you had management consulting, and you had the first time where you're looking at leaders, city leaders, who have to figure out how can I manage this, right? So they weren't necessarily engineers, they weren't finance people, but they had either a mayor or a city council or a
Mm.
board that was really requiring a different level of accountability. So that's really where it got its steam, and it never lost its steam or momentum since then.
Wow. Okay, got you.
Mhm.
And then at some point you decided to start your own firm.
Right. I was just nuts.
No, well, explain that. Like, so you were sitting at work one day drinking coffee, and you had a haha moment. Like, what was that process for you?
Well, you know what? It was so there was a shift definitely. The water part, the water finance part, evolved into just general public administration. And at the time, I was working in Dallas, and
Hmm.
we were looking at there's an area of Dallas where you have the state fair and it's Fair Park. And
Gotcha.
so they were looking at improvements. And it was the first time that I really had to think about the actual people versus the projects, because this
Gotcha.
was the state fair came all the time. And then we had all of these people that would have been displaced, and what did that look like? And as I started growing and the firm was going a different way, and they, you know, City of Dallas and some other folks were like, well, we still want you to work on this. So at that time, you know, when you're young, you don't have any fear. So I was like, okay, makes sense to me. Let me go out and I can do this. And so I think the lack of debt, right? The lack of family commitments, and just, you know, that's the good thing about youth at times. You don't really know what you're doing. And so I said, why not? And then I just kept getting work and getting work. And then it was like, oh, okay, I'm really doing this.
Okay. All right. And what was work? What would that look like as your own consulting firm?
Well, the first thing was getting clients, right?
Okay.
And I think I read a book by Peter Drucker, who had gone to Harvard and was talking about really business, and it was identifying your client. And on the surface, I thought my client at the time was utilities.
Okay.
But when you're a small business, your client, your primary client, is really other engineering firms, right?
Mm.
Because they're the ones that you're subbing to. And so reading that early and understanding that I not only had to have a relationship with the utilities because they were going to be my champion, but I
Right.
also had to have relationships with other firms, and AECOM, it was one of
Right.
my first clients. And
Wow.
so it was really understanding kind of that two-headed monster. And I think that's what I did really well, was client service. And from there, I was able to attract and retain different people, and you just keep getting work, and you go from there across the country and building relationships.
What you consider? 'Cause I hear you say it a lot, like listening
Hmm.
intently. Are
Hmm.
there other things that someone would need to know about client service that would help them if they're getting into roles like that?
You know, I was talking to one of my clients and mentors actually in DC, the CEO of DC Water and also the CEO of Alcosan here. And we talk a lot about not only listening, but serving.
Mm,
And so you have to make a shift between selling and serving, right? Because a lot of people think it's sales and
yeah.
it's really solutions. It's really how can I help you sleep at night, right? And so I
Mm,
think that shift, and when you look beyond the projects and think about the people, that was where you really differentiate yourself between somebody that's just coming and has their hand out, right? You
gotcha.
like are actually looking like, let me partner with you to make sure that you do what you need to do. You serve the people,
Mhm.
and so people, place, and pay is a big part of it.
I can see that you're definitely the daughter of an engineer and a nurse because you definitely have the technical expertise to handle the technicalities of
Hmm.
course, what civil engineering, dealing with engineers. Obviously, engineers like working with you because they know you can
Right,
hang, right? But then you also have the people's touch, which is like what a nurse has over many doctors. It's
right.
like understanding people and what their needs are and why it's important to serve. So I can see how both of this experience growing up with a dad that's an engineer, a mom that's a nurse, or vice versa, could definitely add the value that you had. But at
And he
some
was
point,
also a pastor. He was
I was
also a
also a
pastor.
pastor.
Yeah.
Okay,
So once he retired, he was able to full time. And I think that really gave me a love for people
mm,
and a passion and a grace and a heart for people.
gotcha,
And so I think that definitely plays into it as well.
gotcha. So you grew up in the church, man.
Oh, definitely. Every Sunday, Wednesday, and there were activities. And I laugh now, but it
yeah,
did give me definitely a great foundation because
100.
I think people matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not anything that you can teach. It's either kind of there and you grow to appreciate them or not. So I appreciated all the engineer, the nurse, and the pastor kind of all coming together. And I think it definitely helped me.
Yeah, and it's the Godficance, it's the faith, it's the
Yes.
the patience, the know that things is going to work out if you work hard at it, and God's in control, so it takes away a lot of the anxiety that people may have.
Right.
Yeah, it's just yeah. One of my friends, and I think I discussed this earlier.
Mm,
He recently passed, but one of the
so
things,
sorry.
yeah, it's tough. But when I met him, I was in my junior year.
Hmm.
He was in his freshman year, and we're 11:30 at night, right?
Hmm.
Studying for civil engineering classes. I have to be there. I don't have a choice. It's junior year.
Right.
Remember, I was telling you that there's classes that are gatekeeping classes.
Hmm.
So we
Hmm.
all recognize that we can't do these gatekeeping classes by ourselves. So we would all band together in the civil engineering lounge. And my friend group was diverse. It was somebody from Egypt, someone
Hmm.
from Albania, Jewish guy from Russia. It's just
Hmm.
and myself from Jamaica, right? So it was just a
Right.
diverse group of individuals, right? And so we were there studying together. And I look across the table and I see this kid. He's a freshman. And I walk over to him. I'm like, "What are you doing here? It's like 11:30 at night. You should be out having fun. Like, you don't need to be here." And his
Hmm.
first statement to me was, "I'm here because I want to see the problems you guys are having. So when I get
Mm.
there, I know how to solve them." Freshman
Oh,
year.
wow. Wow.
And so at that point, like I had the same moment. I'm like, wow, this guy really has it together. And he became an honorary junior at that point. Like he was with
Mm.
us, not like you said, service requires consistency, but he was
Right.
there literally with us every time we were studying. He wasn't
Wow. And
just
that says so much about just him and his heart and that drive, right?
right. But being on stage sadly at his funeral, I went to his
Hmm.
church.
Hmm.
When I went to his church and I heard how musical the church was,
Hmm.
how the operations of the funeral service went. At that
Right.
moment, I was like, I understood no why my friend was the way he is because
Mm.
before he got his degrees at NYU and Columbia, this is where he started. This is
Wow.
where he learned how to execute the way he did.
Hmm.
I met him
Mm.
after this and I was in awe of him, but this is where he learned it. He learned it here in this room,
Right.
in this building. So I can definitely feel that, that you said that your dad's a pastor. No, I get it. Like why there's excellence bred into you because you've
Right.
seen excellence from an early age.
And he always said, though, you can tell how somebody lived by what kind of funeral they had, right?
Mm,
And so as you're saying that, and you hear people get up, and I think that's one of the things as we think about leadership, because I've
yeah,
really been really thinking about leadership and what that means. And it's
yeah,
not just the title, it's not just how people experience me, but how I help them experience themselves.
right.
And so I think, as a testament to your friend and his legacy, you having that memory of who he was way back then, I think that's, inspiring to all of us to think that it's
Yeah.
there and how do we tap into it.
Yeah, I mean, I started a student club, and then
Hmm.
I had to obviously you need a transition plan or
Right.
succession plan, and it was like, well, you need someone younger than you, but you also want someone who's going to push it forward, someone who's going to
Right.
execute, and like you just said, someone if you put your head on the pillow, you can sleep well at night.
Yes.
And in my head, I'm like, who is that person for this club? And it was
Hmm.
him, right? So
Right.
it's just, yeah, I love how you said that because that's something that I always think of is like when I work for somebody or when I'm working on something, I want the persons around me to feel like they can sleep okay at night, right?
Right.
So then from there, you
Hmm.
decide to do your firm, and then you decided to start working for a next company. Was it
Hmm.
Tech?
Tetra Tech. Hmm.
Tetra Tech. So what
Right.
was that transition like, and what was working for the engineering firm?
Oh, wow. So that transition happened during COVID, right?
Okay.
And I think one of the things about entrepreneurship, taking a step back, is
Mhm.
that I never was intentional about being an
Mhm.
entrepreneur. It just was something that happened.
Okay.
And I did it for 15, 16 years. And I
Mhm.
think COVID was kind of a reconciliation point or an inflection point for a lot of people. And for me, it was like, okay, do I want to scale this? What does it take to do this? And it offered me an opportunity to pivot. And I remember sitting thinking, like, okay, how am I going to do this? Right. And there was a period kind of shame and uncertainty where I was like,
Mhm.
okay, maybe I'm going to see if I'm going to throw some fillers out. And then one day I just ripped the band-aid off. I did a post on LinkedIn and I said, hey, I'm ready to pivot. I am going to sell off this portion of my business.
Mhm.
And as I did that, that freedom, I think I had 37 interviews and ended up with 6 offers, right? And
37.
so oh my goodness, I had a process down, but it unleashed this part because I let go of the shame. And I talked to a
Mm.
lot of people about pivoting and really that shame of it's not failure. It's just something doesn't work for me anymore. And that's
Right.
fine. And so that's what that transition was like for me. I was ready to be a part of a team as I
Right.
am now. I enjoy it. It's a different challenge for me, working for these large publicly traded companies. You have internal clients, you have external clients, and you're working on these huge efforts. So that transition was definitely humbling.
Right.
And I'm still learning about a lot of it. And so it's been fun.
Got you. So what work does that company specialize in? Was it still in the water industry or was it something
Yes.
different? Okay.
Well,
Got you.
they're similar to my company now, or our
Okay.
company,
Mhm.
AECOM. I was in the water space, the water business line. So they did, of course, transportation and they did disaster recovery, but it
Got
was
you.
still in that architecture, engineering, and construction space.
Got it. Got it. And then of course we gotta get to it. No, no, you're at AECOM.
Right.
Right, and then also in a great vantage point role. I
Hmm.
mean, the company is big, but there's not a
Hmm.
lot of persons of your hue and also of your gender that is in the roles that you're in,
Right.
and it's definitely comes with a lot of pressure. So I'm gonna ask the
Yes.
question, like, I'm sure you've dealt with your own fair share of self doubt, but also people
Hmm.
doubting you, like, and I'm sure there's somebody out there looking out there wanting to get to the vantage point that you are. What are the key components that you feel helped you to get past the friction or the second guessing that could come
Right.
with a role like that?
I think definitely a foundation in knowing that, you're worthy. You deserve to be there just as much as anyone. You do the work, right? You put in the time and you trust the process and you show up. But there's definitely a kind of lost in translations point, right? Where
Mhm.
you're looking around and you're always the only one, right?
Right.
And I think for me, it was owning and leaning into that, right? And what did that purview, what did that point of view add to what I was doing? Because at first it was this fear, like I'm walking in, like, oh my goodness. But
Yeah.
now it's like, hey, we're in these places and I've been able to, whether I'm in, some city in a metropolitan area and I can see someone and they can make eye contact with me, just
Mhm.
excited that they
Right.
see someone that looks like me or looks like them. And
Mhm.
then also from a perspective of the humility and not being the majority, I think you bring a different perspective. You approach the work differently. And so there's definitely been times when I would have maybe entered in conversations a little different. I think you have to learn to give yourself grace to have those
Mm.
conversations because they're not always comfortable. But I think when your heart is right and you really make up your mind that I want to be a part of the solution, I think that's the difference. But you definitely, you'll have imposter syndrome if you're worried about everything you do right. No one looks like me. You got to lean into it and just know, hey, I'm Kay. I'm from Texas. I'm loud and I like to wear heels, right? Like
Yeah,
I
right,
can't be anything else. So,
right.
right.
No, I love you said that, and what I use a lot of times is just thinking of like an athletic mindset, right? Like
Hmm.
no one's looking at LeBron and be like, "Oh, he's not the right hue," right? I mean,
Right.
his skill development and the value that he brings to the team because of his hard work and the skill that he performs on the specific task of being a basketballer has transcend. I mean, it
Right.
doesn't discount whatever
Right.
else that may have been in a boardroom, but
Hmm.
can't discount or discredit the person's skill and aptitude at the role that they're playing, right? And so it's
Right.
just focusing on skill development, and that's your highest priority. Finding strong mentors, people who can kind of help you, because a lot of times, you don't need to run into the brick wall. You should, if you can
Right.
find someone who can help you avoid the brick walls that could, stumbling blocks along the way. Do you have, or when you were growing up, do you have like key person you consider your mentors who helped you through certain stumbling blocks?
Well, I've had mentors, and I think you shift once you get to a certain level of your career
Mm,
where it's not just mentors, but you also need advocates, right? You
mm,
need sponsors. You need those people that will fight for you when you're not in the room, that will bring your name up. So I think it's a balance of people that I learn from, but also the people that are like, no, I'm rocking with Kay, right? Like I've known
right,
her 20 years. This is who I trust. You're doubling down. And so I think as you build your network, you realize that there are some people that are mentors, but
right,
there are some people that just have that heart, they have the position, and actually they have the capital to be able to say like, no, I can fight for her. And so I think it's the balance. I think I've been fortunate because I work on the finance side
right,
that I get to work with a lot of executives, and so I get to see them sometimes in their most vulnerable state. And so
mm,
I've been able to learn a lot, but also serve. And so just I have a few that I work with a lot that have just really taught me a lot about showing up. And one of my clients, who's also a good friend here, when I was younger, I was just so outgoing, right? It was just so much energy, and I didn't know how to modulate myself.
mm,
And she was like, Kay, you don't have to bark when you can growl, and you don't have to growl when you just show up on the porch. So now
mm,
sometimes all I know is I just have to show up. I don't have to do anything extra. I've done the work for 25 years. And so I think having people like that is important.
right. Yeah, no, that's good, and that's like a strong friend who is giving real good feedback for you, because everyone has their blind spots, like,
Right.
and people, like, if you think about a sport, right? A
Hmm.
coach is there even though you're a professional. The professional boxers still have a coach.
Right.
You're better than most people in the world at boxing. But if you were able to look over in a boxing match and not see a coach behind that person at the match, it would look crazy. It would look
Right.
absolutely nuts. So
Right.
to think that, I think what we do as our is intellectual athletes, right?
Hmm.
And skill development is the highest priority. So why wouldn't you have someone in your corner who can tweak things for you or help you see things you're not seeing? Because that's what happens to a lot of boxers. You're in the middle of a fight,
Right.
doesn't mean that you're seeing the traits that you're giving up on what that person is, but someone completely to the side who has your best interest can give you insight that you're not seeing at the moment. So that's a key component right there. So now let's talk about being at AECOM. What's
Okay.
that journey been like for you?
It was, I think at first it was deer in the headlights because
Gotcha.
you hear about it, and I think it's that sometimes be careful what you pray for because you have to be ready.
Right.
It's a large company. They have huge programs, and it is, it's publicly traded. So you have metrics, you have people,
Mhm.
and you really have to learn not only your external clients, because I bought that, but I had to build. internal networks. And
Mm,
I had to learn internally that we have all of these teams and all of these dynamics. And what does that mean?
right,
And so for me, it's been an incredible privilege because I think about all the people that, I get emails, and I'm sure you do as well, or LinkedIn notices of trying to be where we are. And so
right,
I don't take that lightly, but I also think it's a huge responsibility as far as being an example and being a leader. And how do I impact those people
right.
that are just watching that I don't even see? So,
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, big vantage point. And I'm sure the financing on the publicly traded firms are way more stringent, a lot
mhm,
more difficulty, a lot more paperwork, I'm sure.
right.
So, what would you consider like the big topic in water industry at the moment that people have been the problem they're trying to solve? If I was a fly in the wall in one of your meetings, what would you be
Right.
discussing at the moment that you can share?
Well, of course, funding is one. You
Yeah.
have PFAS. You have forever chemicals that you want to treat for. You have water supply, kind of like in what you do. Like, what are you doing with reuse? How are you cooling? You have AI. Where
Mm,
we're looking at data centers and how we cool those data centers. But also, relationships. It still gets down to who do you know
right.
and who can trust you to solve this problem.
Right.
And so I think when all of that comes about, and also homeland security, so cybersecurity and making sure that we're safe and the drinking water is safe. So all of those things kind of come together. But it's fast moving. It's like a super highway. There's not one that supersedes.
The
Now I'm thinking
other
about
one.
water supply. I'm thinking about funding. We've had a change in administration, and people
Right.
are wondering, well, we had all this funding. What do we do now? So at the end of the day is how can you solve problems, and how can you reach out to those resources that can help you solve those problems?
Oh, I have questions for you. Let's start with that. Oh, I got questions for you. So let's start with that AI
Okay.
data center construction because I don't
Hmm.
think most people are aware how that would affect water. So how does data, AI, and water intersect at this moment?
Well, they're building all of these, I guess, kind of data centers, these warehouses, and that equipment needs to be cooled. And so you need energy and you need water. And
Right.
water, not, treated water to a certain degree, is
Yeah.
what cools them. But as they grow, they are requiring a lot of water that
Mm,
communities don't always have access to. And so, it's like, where can we put these centers where we have power, where we have water, where we have political support? So it's where
right.
all of these things come together, and they can't build them fast enough. We're getting new phones, we're getting all of that. And so
Right.
what does that look like, right? And where are they getting this from? And so I think that has been an incredible concern, because we think of AI just from a chat GPT, right?
Right.
How we can have it, but it's a lot of infrastructure that's required from that. But it also, I think the opportunity is that it brings the private sector and public sector together, right?
Mm,
It brings the utilities in with the private sector, and they have to figure out it's in their best interest to see, well, how can we get you more water? But we also have residents. We also have people that want to water their lawn.
right.
And now we're giving it to you. And so that's how it all comes together. So that's been fascinating for me, because at first
Right.
I was like, well, what are they doing with it? And
Mhm.
then
Right.
it went from there.
Well, it's funny because like the big topics in data center
Hmm.
construction is usually focused around electrical energy
Hmm.
because they consume so much electrical
Right.
energy. And similar to water, it's paid by rates, and
Hmm.
so they were thinking about even doing tariffs on
Right.
data center providers because they're grabbing so much of the resource that there's nothing else to give to anyone else, and the pace at which it's growing. Like you said,
Right.
everyone has a phone. Everyone before getting a phone, you were like 15. Now kids are getting phones from they're 16, or even before 6.
Oh yeah,
They
six,
get
eight.
8,
Right.
right, and then iPads. Everything.
Right.
Even just our ability to have this podcast is because there's a cloud computing storage
Right.
somewhere, right?
Right. Right.
And so you know the energy requirement, but I don't think anyone realized that it's also doing a strain on the water, the necessary
Yes.
water environment. And then of course now the cybersecurity. That's an interesting topic. Like how does well, I think obviously people can
Right.
attack water mains, but is
Right.
it mostly dams? Like, how does that work, cybersecurity?
No, you think about the water supply. I mean, I think water is now number three on the national security threat. And so
Mm,
part of it, even on the data side, you have people that will take your billing system, they will take your treatment. And so you have a public health threat, but you also have people that take it and kind of want ransom. And so you have all of this that comes if you have outdated infrastructure. When you think about digital innovation, and you think about the internet of things, right? You
right.
actually have meters, smart meters, and all of these things in the pipes that's sending information. And you're looking at distribution centers where now you're not just have one distribution center, you have all of these places, and how are they connected? And so anytime you have these different points of connection, it increases the level of threat. And
Mm,
so you also have new educational requirements and new personnel and new professionals. So I think it's an opportunity as we look at bringing more people into our industry. It's an incredible opportunity for us to reach, the inner city. A lot of these kids are want to study technology. They want to see
right.
what can I do with computers. And so I think it's going to be a great opportunity to blend civil engineering with a lot of the technical, the AI and the cybersecurity. So that's kind of like where I get in, where it comes all together as far as, although it's not my background, when I'm
Yeah,
talking to a client, I have to understand all of these pieces to help them
of
make better
course.
decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a juggling act. It's a lot of
Right.
different moving pieces, and if you don't keep your eye on the ball, a couple of them can fall. So it's not. It's also being a strategist, but also a juggler at the same time.
Right.
But while juggling all these moving pieces, you're
Mhm.
also a mom, and
Yes.
you're a mom to a teenage black boy. So
Yes.
that's not easy, you know.
Not easy.
It's the safety, the concern as a mom, especially with what's going on in our country as it pertains to black men getting killed. So I know there's that anxiety, but there's also the fact of like raising a son while
Hmm.
also taking, because being on projects is like mini babies. They all
Hmm.
need attention, right? So
Right. Right.
how do you find the time? What's your process of balancing this all?
Well, balance is tough. I say it's
Yeah,
it's a day to day, right? It's
right.
always you're aligning and recalibrating. And I think the important thing is I do my best to get it right. But, yesterday he was talking about going to the mall with a group of his friends, basketball,
Right.
friends, and I had to have a conversation with him about wearing his hoodie, right?
Yeah.
Not having his hoodie over his head, having his hands in his pockets, and if anything happens, calling his mom, right? Like
Right.
say, no, call my mom. And so that was definitely a sobering moment because I
Mhm.
explained to him, you have the right to call your mom an attorney. He's like, Mom, I know what Miranda rights are. And he's 14, right?
That's yeah.
And so then with that, but also, today he's going to practice and really explaining to him the importance of being great, the difference between just being good and being great. And if you only do the work when you're practicing, you're not going to be great.
Mm,
And the reason that we have the life or what he sees the drive is not for naught. Like, I want you to understand that I'm not always going to be in your face. Unfortunately, I'm not always going to be, around. So I want you to have that drive and that desire for yourself. And so I think those values are important as for me, not only to talk to him about, but to display. And
right.
so I really try to demonstrate as best I can. You have people, I'm a single mom.
Mhm.
And you have people who have thoughts about that, but I think that's where God's grace, right? And I focus on, hey, I can do what I can do, and I pray that God fills in the gaps. But as
Yep.
far as who He is and what I need to do, I just work on values and making sure that He is equipped to make the best decisions and has the best opportunities that He can.
Well, I can tell you from someone who is come from a single mom
Mm,
background, and my dad obviously did a great. He was around,
right.
but
Hmm.
my mom and I grew up in Jamaica for 19
Hmm.
years, right? That
Right.
was my soldier in the trenches with me,
Hmm.
basically. And that person becomes a conscience when you're not
Yes.
there because you hear their words in your head when you're out and doing your thing.
Right.
So definitely by focusing on the values, you really is going to make him a great person, a great
I
individual.
That is my prayer. One day I want someone to say, "Oh, you have home training," or "Your mom did a great job," or for him to look at himself and say, I'm proud of myself is
Yeah,
really important
that's
for me.
gonna happen. Trust me, because
Right.
in Jamaica we have a saying: the person come off a good table, meaning like
Mm,
the person pedigree. Like I said, I met my friend in college. I knew his pedigree just by the statement he made day one. Like, all right, I get it. This guy
right.
gets it, and that's gonna happen. And you have him in sports too, so I'm sure that's an interesting dynamic because you're a former
Oh my
athlete.
goodness.
He's an athlete now. What's that like?
Well, it's been interesting. He started, I remember one of my neighbors invited him to just basketball
Hmm.
camp or something when he was in first grade, and he fell in love with it. And so we were basketball for years. And then this past year, he said, I think I want to try football. And he was just, like, okay. And
Right.
I didn't know what to expect. And he was like a natural and he loved
Hmm.
it. And so I think for me, it's been learning in sports that I may have my dreams for him, but he has his dreams for himself,
So,
right? And so how do we reconcile that? So it's been fun. It's definitely busy. Every day we're going somewhere. It's basketball, it's football, it's track, it's all of these things. But when I think about the alternatives, right? Like that he could be in trouble or he could be playing video games. I'm
right.
glad, it's a blessing that he wants to do all of these things. So
Yes.
definitely it with our time constraints, having a full-time demanding career, but being a mother definitely is my why and my driver. So I do allow that to take precedent and dictate everything else that we do.
And while dealing with this, I'm sure, being a mom, being
Mhm.
a high exec in a multi-million dollar, billion dollar company, still need to find time to unwind. Like, what's your mode of doing it? What activities do you do, or books you read, or things you do to kind of align yourself, your self care routine? What's that for you?
I've recently, I think because of the shift and the pivot, I've been more into self-help kind of books or more into people that have walked this path. But I also realize, I think that rest is an active
Ooh,
thing. And before I thought rest was kind of wasting time because you get in this thing of you have to be busy, you have to be doing something.
right.
And so now I've learned that rest requires intention and I need to do it. And so for me, sometimes it's just now, it's creating those boundaries of no, I need to unplug. And it's okay. The
Right.
world's not going to fall in. And even reading, it's not sometimes it's self help. It may be scrolling, it may be finding a book, just something that I enjoy. And so I
Right.
think the pause for me is the balance and not necessarily what I'm doing because before I just felt like I always had to be doing something. So,
Yeah, it's that feeling like if you're not doing something, you're losing time, right? And
oh,
like, and then you start beating yourself up about the time that you lost. But then it's
right,
like it's bad because it's like it's a snowball effect. You're just not quite as sharp as you could be in the time that
right,
you're up
right.
because you're not rested, right? And a part of being in the exact role that you're in is making sharp decisions and making it decisively, right? And
Right.
providing that confidence to people. And so, yeah, the sleep routine, a lot of times, so when you go to like a boxing gym or a UFC
Hmm.
gym or a jiu-jitsu gym, a lot of coaches will tell you the difference maker between the champions and the person
Mm,
who's good is literally their recovery routine.
mm,
It's their recovery routine because what happens now is you're thinking about compounding time, right? This
right,
person is getting 6, 7, 8 hours of proper hours of sleep. They're not getting injured as much, so they're not
right,
dropping off their training. They're not home now. They're not fighting the anxiety. You know what it's like being an
right.
athlete and being injured. It's more mental than anything else because you
Oh my
can't.
goodness.
You got to stop
I,
yourself, right?
right. Well, I tore my rotator cuff this summer, actually, on the way to work.
Hmm.
And it was a very humbling experience because it was my right arm
Right.
and I'd never really been injured. And your
Hmm.
shoulder, you don't realize how
How
much you
much?
use it. But the big thing was not only the pain, but the lack of sleep, right? And I had to have some conversations because it definitely impacted my mood.
Right.
It definitely impacted just the ability to do homework, the just how I felt overall. And I
Hmm.
had never really felt that. And so that was my first lesson in rest now looks different than it used to be. Like rest used to be like I could go out and run and I can do that. Now it's just sit down somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's understanding massage, understanding sleep. And so now I know because I'd never really been awakened in pain, right?
Right.
And I went through that and still, going through the physical therapy. So I think that is the importance of, like you said, like I was actually, you're rushing, you're going through life, you're doing this,
Yep.
and something in an instant can change how you do things. So I think that's been definitely an important lesson for me, and something that I'm now still saying, like, okay, haven't had surgery. Like, what does healing look like? Like,
Right.
what's the optimal result? So that's
Yeah, and
definitely.
it's interesting. Like, 'cause I come from Jamaica, but I also live in New York. So New York is
Hmm.
hustle and bustle, and then
Right.
like coming from the islands, we the joke about island time, right? And
Right.
then everyone in the islands seem happy, but I also think it's also we there's just like on a Sunday, it just
Hmm.
feels like you have an abundance of time to just take it easy, right?
Right.
Take a breath. And so what happens in these like high performing first world countries is like hustle, 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 and then you don't have any time for yourself. So there's like a
Right.
reprieve. The only time you reprieve is having a vacation. So you look forward to your vacation, and every other times you're just frustrated and stressed out. And you could be making 7x most people make in Jamaica, but a
Right.
person has a constant smile on their face because there's like a natural every day there's some time for yourself, right?
Right.
So, it's just like recognizing that balancing act of like, of course, I want to push through and muscle through things and take on the world, but also part of it is also taking care of yourself.
Right.
I've read, it's funny. So, everyone knows Alexander the Great, right? But
Hmm.
Alexander the Great, his mentor, you know who his mentor was?
I don't.
Aristotle,
Oh, wow.
which is
Okay.
crazy. Imagine
Right.
Aristotle being your mentor, right?
Right.
And so Aristotle would write while Alexander is out doing what Alexander does. He would write letters to him, and half of the letter is not anything about conquering or general strategy. It's literally don't drink septic water. If the water doesn't
Right.
look clean, don't drink it,
Right.
right?
Right.
Make sure you brush it. I'm laughing because it's like he's parenting like one of the greatest generals of all time. And the things that he's focused on wasn't like, the strategy, how to lead. These are the things you don't pay attention to that
Right.
cost you your problems, right?
Right.
So, for instance, and I hate to go back to it, but this is the same thing that happened with my friend. Like he had, you know, pneumonia, but he thought it was a cold, and
Mm.
he didn't wasn't sure that it was a cold. It's just for pneumonia to set into your system, your immune system has to come
Right.
down enough for it to get into your system for it to get
Hmm.
septic. So, and he's a go-getter type of person like myself. So part of me, what the pain that I have with this moment is like, was he giving himself enough rest? Was he
Right.
giving himself a break? Like it's
Right.
okay to be not doing something.
Right. And give yourself grace. I was on the phone with a colleague the other day, and I was, I lost my dad in 2023. So coming up on about a year and a half ago, and I told her, I said, he always said, don't lose the war because you're distracted by your thirst, right? And if
Mm,
the enemy can get you against the ropes, if he can get you tired, if you can get weary,
mhm.
that's when you're most vulnerable.
Right.
And so that's always, I hear him talking to me, or even like your friend, like at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is not even going to matter. Look at yourself, what's important, take time, go to the doctor, and sometimes just take a mental health day, because we go so far and you don't realize, like sometimes I'm just sitting in the car and I'm thinking, was it really that important, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm going and I'm thinking I have this meeting. And so I think when you see, like, your friend, who you lost your friend, or I
Mhm.
lost my dad, and I lost I remember losing my brother, just how fleeting life is, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I try to balance. And even now, I'm thinking about some of the things I do today, or, when you're talking to your child, I want to go back and say, hey, this is the why, this is the big picture.
This is the
And so I
one.
think even this conversation really helps me just to kind of think about, like, hey, I just wanted to make sure you're aware of, even this podcast, we're going through to say, doing what you say you're going to do matters,
Yep.
right? And
100%.
so, regardless of everything you wanted to do, making a commitment
Hmm.
is important. And this is what it looks like when you have a friend, is that we had an agreement.
Yep.
And so I think that at times, you're in the hustle and bustle and you forget to say, no, your word. has to mean something. And so I
Yes.
think as we think about that, that's definitely an important lesson.
I think of it like, I think you as a finance person is gonna love this. I think of it like an exponential curve and
Hmm.
compounding time. And so everything we know it in finance with your retirement plan. You put a little
Hmm.
each day, and then Albert Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. Over time,
Hmm.
it exponentially grow. But I think that also happens with things that you do. So
Right.
holding your word doesn't seem like it's giving you any results for a long time
Right.
until it does,
Right.
right? And when it does, it looks like it just came out of the blue, but you're either compounding positively or compounding negatively, right?
Right.
Like when you brush your teeth, you don't get cavities. When you
Right.
don't brush your teeth, it's not that you're gonna get cavities immediately. It takes time before you
Right.
have this precipice, right? So I always think of it like that, like just do the tangible next positive step that you can take. Leave the
Right.
rest to God. Don't worry about the rest. Eventually, there's going to be these moments where it happens and you're like, wow, all this hard work previously, no, it was preparing me for this moment, this
Right.
opportunity, and you can take the opportunity because you prepared. So preparation is key. So, but just giving yourself that grace along the way is super, super important. So
For
now, right,
sure.
one last thing I have for you is
Okay.
if you were 21,
Oh, wow.
21,
Okay. Long
yeah,
time ago.
and you wanted to give some tips to a 21-year-old just starting their career,
Okay.
what would be that tip you would give them to get them to where you are at the moment?
I'd say first, don't doubt yourself, right?
Okay.
Um, that, you're always going to have people that are better or you think are stronger or had a better life experience, but you can outwork a lot of people, right? And so even family history, even money, it is a direct relationship to how hard you want to work,
Mm.
right? I think also sowing good seeds, right? Like you and I just talked about like your word, but I think of all the people in AECOM, right? It's 60,000 people. And when you sow good seeds and you have that positivity,
Mm.
you attract positive people. And so I think that not enough people really think about, I'm going to sow seeds. I don't know when I'll reap the harvest,
Yep.
but it's important, and you and I, now you're forever bonded. And that's important because you have someone that can be positive. And so I think that's important. I don't think we focus enough on relationships. So that's the two things I would say. Don't doubt yourself and keep sowing good seeds. Treat people right because it's the right thing to do.
Well said. Can't say it any better. The only thing that I've said in the past to people is that, the universe is infinitely growing in
Right,
all directions, and you can either decide to be a black hole or a sun. A sun
right,
gives off light, and from its light, the earth orbits and things spring from that light. Or you could be a black hole that takes and not give. And any solar system that has a black hole never flourish, right? So
right,
you give off your light, and if someone decided the persons in front of you are giving off their light inspires you, your light inspires me, and my light inspires you, right? And so it's
right.
just at that point you guys are working towards your different goals, or similar goals, or the same goal, but it works and it helps. But I appreciate your time, Kay. Thank you
Well,
for
I
coming on the
appreciate you.
podcast.
I just want to thank you for doing this. I know this is not only it takes a lot of time, but it's something. It's a ministry of love. It's a labor of love. I think there's a lot of people that will benefit, and so I appreciate you seeing something in me. But I appreciate your time. Your preparation. I know people see the outcome, but they don't know
Right.
how much. And so I definitely want to say thank you. And however I can support you, if please let me know. But I really appreciate this experience. So
Of
thank you.
course. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And there's just certain things that you can't put tangible things on, right? For
Right.
instance, I had the opportunity with the same friend. I had him on the podcast,
Mm.
right? He was one of the episodes, one of the guests. I have no something, a recorded
Oh, wow.
event with this person, and I was able to ask him, like, how do you do what you do, right? And so
Right.
you're right. Some things are a labor of love, but it's worth it because you never know how
You
it's
never
going to
know.
impact you in the future. Like
Right.
hindsight is 2020. No, I can always go back and I can see my friend again. So
Well, definitely please send me or post that so all of us can see his legacy and honor his legacy and get to know him even through you and just hear his words that will live on. So definitely please post that, send it to me because I want to, you've talked about him and I know there are going to be some tidbits to share. So thanks for honoring his memory as well.
I appreciate you, Kate. Thanks for
Okay.
coming on.
All right. No problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.